usted va a hacer la presentación. Y entonces se van a cambiar el...
Okay. Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Primero que nada, una disculpa por el retraso. Tuvimos un pequeño problemas con el equipo de cómputo, pero ya estamos compartiendo su conocimiento, sus experiencias, y también viene a compartirnos las oportunidades que hay dentro de la Universidad de Edimburgo para ir a estudiar allá su maestría o su doctorado. Es una ciudad bastante bonita. Hace 2 años tuve la oportunidad de estar con él, fui por allá de trabajo, y la verdad es que es una universidad bastante extensa y en un lugar muy estudiantil. Toda la ciudad, ¿no? Es así como otras universidades en Europa. Entonces, también igual les va a presentar esto, las oportunidades que ustedes pueden optar una vez que ya terminen su licenciatura en Ciencias de la Tierra o en Geografía Aplicada, pues él viene también igual por aquí a platicar sobre ella, ¿no? Afortunadamente ya ahorita Neil más o menos ya habla un poco más de español. Yo cuando lo conocí pues no hablaba nada de español, todo en inglés, pero a lo largo de los años entre los dos cuando nos vemos, tanto yo practico mi inglés como él practica su español, y pues nos vamos a ir corrigiendo, ¿no? Entonces, afortunadamente ya viene un poquito, más sin embargo, si ustedes le expresan sus preguntas al final en inglés, pues se los va a agradecer mucho. Y si no, pues bueno, aquí le comentamos al doctor sus inquietudes, ¿ok? Entonces, gracias, doctor, por estar con nosotros, y adelante.
Muchísimas gracias a Marco. Hola a todos, ¿cómo estás? ¿Todo bien? Sí. Perdón los problemas técnicos en la primera parte. Vamos a presentar solo un poquito de introducción en un video sobre mi escuela en Edimburgo para darte una invitación para visitar si quieres o si tienes el tiempo en la futura. Primeramente vamos a ver solo un poquito, solo un minuto de introducción al video, por favor. Gracias. So, en un momento va a comenzar mi presentación, pero puedes mirar, hay una escuela más grande, más que 300 académicos, otros diferentes disciplinarios. Estoy un geógrafo para llevar, distribuir proyectos interdisciplinarios que se involucran muchos académicos con diferentes disciplinas. Posiblemente es mejor para ustedes si me hablar en inglés. Mi inglés es fortunadamente mejor que mi español. Después, con Dr. Marco he dicho, si tienes preguntas fáciles, me puede prestar en inglés, y por las preguntas difíciles, Marco va a responder. No, solo un broma. So I'm very grateful for the invitation. Gracias por la invitación para ser aquí. In otros años, I have given this presentation in geografía, but I think es muy importante para abrir la conversación sobre los otros estudiantes, sobre geólogos, las ciencias de la tierra, porque para estudiar esos necesitas un perspectiva multidimensional sobre las diferentes disciplinas. And what I have learned over the years is that in my school, the geologists, the volcanologists, the geographers, and the social scientists, we all work together. And I can say that in the future, if you are thinking about working, and I'm sure you're thinking about employment and jobs, this ability for us to work together is really important. So if there's one message from my presentation, it is be prepared, prepare yourself to work in an interdisciplinary way. And that way, I think we will tackle some of these big challenges which we saw in the video today. So just to ask for avanzar las prácticas, ¿podemos? Sí, con eso? Sí, okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit, pero más que mis prácticas son en inglés, pero un poquito son en español también. I chose this topic because estoy un geógrafo. My background is also in cartography, and I was the director of our Geographical Information Science program for many years. And that's actually how Marco and I first met, with his interest in databases, bases de datos, in mi interest in cartografía. And what I wanted to share with you today, muchas gracias, is a little bit about how we work together in Scotland, but we tackle problems all over the world. And my examples today are going to come from Central America. That's my area of interest. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project we have in Guatemala, because I think it's a good example of how we work together. I think it's a good example of how, even though we may think we're very far away in Edinburgh, we are connected very strongly with Central America. Gracias. And my boss would like me to tell you that Edinburgh is a very nice place for you to study. We are quite famous university. We have más o menos 50,000 students altogether. And we are ranked quite highly in the global rankings, like in the top 20, and particularly for environment and sustainability. So if you're interested in these things, then please consider visiting us or even studying with us in the future in Edinburgh. Thank you. A little bit about me, mis introducciones. Bienvenido, Anil. ¿Quién estoy? Who am I? For many years, I directed our master's program. Tenemos más que 15 maestrías, programas de maestría in Edimburgo, and my specialization was in GIS. Here you can see me giving some courses. Yo doy cursos aquí en el Instituto de Geografía. So this is me giving a course with colleagues of Marco, just across in IG. And also in Mexico, I have been working a little bit on rivers, because rivers are a very good way to do interdisciplinary work. When we study rivers, we encounter many issues, how we use the water, how we think about risks, how we think about vulnerability. And this knowledge of working with los ríos, por ejemplo, en este caso en Michoacán, los ríos de Morelia, we can transfer some of this thinking to other hazards and other kinds of risks. And for me, I think it's really important that we connect our science with people. I think it's really important, and risk is a very good mechanism to connect physical processes, our physical sciences that we learn, for example, in earth sciences, in seismology, in volcanology, but we shouldn't forget the people who are involved in that process as well, because sometimes we think technically about solutions. We don't always remember to include the people as part of the solution. So my other message today is, and what I want to share with you really, is how I have changed my thinking over the years, because I'm a poquito viejo de estos días, how I have changed my thinking about this need to involve people in everything we do. And for me, a beginning point was a paper I wrote a few years ago now in GeoJournal, if I can say it correctly, GeoJournal, about participation, about when people can participate. We really hope to have impact that people will participate in our projects. But in the project with the Ríos de Morelia, we found many people did not want to participate. And the science was good, the technology was good, but why did not people want to participate? And the reasons were many, but part of the reasons were about how people trust or do not trust authorities. You know, how people trust or do not trust authorities is really important everywhere, and it's especially important aquí in Mexico now. So I wrote this paper. People told me, like, hey, it's muy pesimístico. It's not really pessimistic. It's realistic. It's la realidad. And it helps me to think about how we engage with people in different ways, and how when we do our very good science, we create very good maps of risks, but how do we then make sure that people can use that information? And I know you have some great examples here. For example, in seismology, you have a very fantastic monitoring network. And it's part of the story is to do the science, but we also have to have that communication so that we explain those risks to people. And sometimes, in the case of seismology, in the case of volcanology, we have to communicate really quickly sometimes. So I hope that would be an interesting topic. You have to suffer listening to me for a little bit. I hope it may be interesting for you. I'm going to try to talk for not more than 30 minutes so that we have time for some questions as well. Is it okay, chicos? ¿Está bien? Okay. Si necesitas dormir, tú puedes. Okay. So, bienvenido a mi escuela. No es una escuela afuera en la paisaje, pero tenemos viajes en el campo, trabajos al campo. We have a lot of field work. And aquí puedes ver las embalsas or the reservoirs This is just outside the city of Edinburgh. And you can see here some little information about our programs. 300 academics. Más importante is that we have a lot of international students. At least 30%, 20% de todos los estudiantes in Edinburgh son internacionales. So if you come, you'll be part of an international community. Gracias. So let's talk now, the main part of the talk, about riesgos y desastres. I'm sure at least some of you have studied this cycle, este ciclo. It's called the disaster response cycle. ¿Sabes? ¿Conoces un poquito este ciclo? Do you know this cycle? A little bit? A few of you? The idea is that disasters happen regularly. No solo uno evento, no. Normalmente es un ciclo de eventos. So we have to understand how and when we can help with this process. And sometimes the event helps us to prepare for the next time. We know as scientists, it's very difficult. It's difícil estimar cuándo, no? It's really difficult to know when an event like flujo piroclástico or terremoto, erupción, hay métodos por estimar, but hay incertidumbres. There are uncertainties in this. And so my message today is that sometimes the best we can do is to learn and to get better, por mejorar. So I was thinking about my field. I was thinking about how we make maps and how we can make those maps better and how we can recognize that we can sometimes make maps and those maps can be used at different times as we go around this cycle. So can we design maps for different stages in the cycle of disasters? Gracias. Hay muchas consultas, hay muchas preguntas en este tema. But for me, it's about being flexible, about making maps differently, about not just staying with conventions. Conventions are good, conventions are useful, but sometimes it's good to push la frontera, empuje la frontera, and design maps a little bit differently. I try to show you some examples of this. So how do we make the maps more relevant? You know, you might tell me, Neil, tenemos muchos mapas. We have a lot of maps already. Tenemos muchos mapas científicos. We have very good scientific maps. And I agree with you, me acuerdo, I agree with you. Pero the problem is that if the maps are good, ¿por qué las personas no utilizan? Why are people not using them always? So I think this is a challenge we have to think about. So I'm thinking about maps as a ways of communication. And of course, you can tell me that, Neil, that there's other ways of communication. No es solo mapas, so I agree, you're acuerdo. But for me, I'm thinking about communication through maps or different kinds of maps in different ways. Thank you. And that's why it's very helpful for me to be in a big school with lots of geoscientists, because we can talk together. For ejemplo, esta profesora is a volcanologist. She is a volcanologist, and this is one of my PhD students. And we are consulting here with the institutions in Ciudad de Guatemala. We're talking with the Guatemalan authorities about how they create maps. So this is a little bit like the equivalent of INEGI, who make maps here in Mexico, trying to understand what kinds of information we already have about risks and hazards. Thank you. In every GIS talk, I siempre un gráfico con eso, sí, con muchas capas. We love, gustamos estos niveles de información. This idea of capas of information. Para mí, these layers speak to different audiences sometimes. And we have a better capacity these days than ever to have more information, but sometimes more information gives us a challenge. Which information shall we show? Which audience are we trying to address? And a question I have for you, if you can help me think about this question, is how do we combine, cómo combinar diferentes capas, diferentes tipos de información? Cuando algunas es científico, el otro es posiblemente comunitario, con esencia de las comunidades. ¿Cómo combinarlos? I think this is the question I'm thinking about today, and I invite you to help me think about it. What do I mean when I talk about community knowledge? I'm just trying to say that in many cases, no tenemos solos las soluciones. We don't have all the answers, even though we are very good scientists. And that people who live in that place know very well about risks. Sometimes when we do trabajo a campo, sometimes when we visit places, we are really telling people what they know already. Perhaps a little bit more, we can discuss it. But I think it's important that we try to balance their knowledge with our knowledge, okay? Because if we can combine the two knowledges, I think the final solution, it's not only better, but it's more acceptable for them. In this case, this is a method which we use well. It's called community mapping or mapping participatory mapping. And you can see here that these are members of local indigenous women's groups who I made a map for them. And they told me, Neil, it's muy bonita, pero incorrecto. It doesn't have the correct information. Okay, so dímelo, ¿qué son los errores en mi mapa? And they told me, sometimes the names are wrong. Sometimes the names are out of date. We don't call this place this name. This is the name from the official map. But here, we have a different name for this place, so we don't recognize the name on the map. So this is a very good way of finding out ¿qué son los puntos de interés para ti? Which are the important places? ¿Qué lugares tiene significancia para ustedes? So this exercise is I think, the first step in making maps better. Is mejorar the base map, make the base map more relevant for people. I think it's más fácil por explicar en un contexto. So I'm going to give you one example of a context where we try to do this. We try to combine the science knowledge with the knowledge of the communities. And we think about this in the context of a specific event. ¿Recuerdas este evento, personas? ¿Recuerdas esto? En Guatemala fue muy importante la erupción del volcán de fuego en junio 3 de junio 2018. más grave por personas. Es un enfoque por la atención internacional sobre los riesgos a las comunidades que viven al lado de los volcanes en las sierras costal de Guatemala. Gracias. Y esta es la realidad. Eso es la devastación. This is the reality of flujo piroclástico. ¿Conoces cuál es un flujo piroclástico? Sí, todas las geofísicas, ¿no? Sí. That many people, most people, don't know, no sabe cuál es un flujo piroclástico, and most people no sabe la velocidad de esos, the speed of these, and the destruction of these. And it's very, very difficult para estimar, para pronóstico, to predict these, when these happen. So this was an event in which people realized the danger and the risks of living close to this volcano. Now, en este momento, tú puedes decir, ay, Neil, pero tenemos mapas. We do have maps of this. This is the map of this event. ¿Sabes la Copernicus System por el monitoreo del desastre, sí? Por iniciar y preparar. Aquí, a 5 de junio, son dos días, tenemos este mapa. Es un mapa fantástico, ¿no? Por nosotros. Podemos interpretarlo, ¿no? Podemos ver aquí, es ¿cómo se dice? La cráter. Podemos ver aquí en la rojo, la espectra es caliente en el centro aquí, y podemos ver esta ruta del flujo piroclástico. So, por nosotros, es un buen mapa, hay mucha información aquí. Pero, always a pero, el problema es este tipo de información es difícil por la pública para interpretar, en mi opinión. And so, no es el producto final en mi mente, es el producto inicial. Y necesito entender cómo adaptar este tipo de información por una audiencia más pública. Por ejemplo, solo un ejemplo, este mapa. Este mapa se produjo, it was produced for the New York Times for a public audience, una audiencia pública. And this was made the next day, and this, of course, was published by thousands and read by millones de personas, no? It's a trusted source of information. But for me, what was interesting here was that the graphics allow even me, I'm not a geophysicist, I can see here the gravity of this event. I can see here que ocurren la devastación en estos pueblitos, porque it's contextual, it's geographical, and it shows that many of these villages are living in a risky area. So I'm trying to illustrate the difference between scientific information and presentations for a public audience. Gracias. The reason this event was, I think, so important, so dramatic, tan triste, fue que there were two locations, dos ubicaciones cerca. En la primera, la reunión, personas que muertas fue zero, no mortality in the first location. but the flow was very close. This is the picture. It was a Campo a Golfo. So it was a lugar de vacación. En el otro lugar, perdón, sí, gracias. Al lado, más o menos al lado, en la barranca, el nombre San Miguel Las Lotes, misma distancia del volcán. La diferencia, tremendos. Muchas personas, hundreds of people muertos en este pueblito. La pueblito más o menos todo. Mira las fotos. ¿Cuál es la diferencia? Well, una de las diferencias es la comunicación, la información. Las personas no reciben nada de información. Un otro is the preparation, that in this village they had no warning, they had no preparation, and they had no evacuation plan. These are not the only reasons, but when you have two villages very close, and two different outcomes, it makes us think about how we are creating information, for who is using the information, and why. Gracias. And in my cycle, this is the beginning, this is an event. Now let's go around the cycle, because after the eruption happens, everything changes, todo cambio. And we need new maps. We need to know qué barrancas es posible cruzar, por ejemplo, which can we cross? Los puentes son buenos or no? Are the bridges open or closed? And we need information to distribute esenciales, comidas, aguas, y todos. So there is a very big need for information después del evento. Trabajamos con esta organización, ¿sabes? Map Action. ¿Todos? ¿Sí? ¿Uno? ¿Sí? ¿Dos? Es una institución humanitaria. Ellos preparan mapas de diferentes tipos para diferentes eventos y diferentes etapas en el ciclo, different stages of the cycle. So it's a charity, and they coordinate humanitarian aid. And for more than más que 20 años, they respond to disasters. Fuegos, terremotos, eventos volcánicos, inundaciones, todos los riesgos en el mundo, más o menos. And for me, they are a really good example of the power of maps, la utilidad de mapas, por diferentes razones, diferentes proyectos. En este caso, cuál fue interesante para este evento is this was the first time, for la primera vez, that we created these maps online, and we made the map in almost real time. So about 1 week after the event, we took the Copernicus data and we put it, this is ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online, and we put the information into ArcGIS Online para compartir. Es como un dashboard. Es como partir la información en un situation report por todas las voluntarias organizaciones, por ejemplo, Cruz Rojo, todos los otros. En una semana fui más que 50,000 hits, ¿cómo se dice hits? 50,000 visitas en esta. That statistic, I think, shows us that if we can find the right kind of map and we can put it in a way that's accessible por personas, the power and the utility of the map is much bigger, it's much greater. So you might tell me, no, Neil, but la información científica en los mapas de Copérnicos es mejor. Probablemente sí, pero la accesibilidad de estos tipos de información es más, sí, es más rápido, comunicación de eso, es más simple. Hay incertidumbres en eso, sí, so we still have to work on this, pero es evidente que es una alternative forma de comunicación, and we say in English, it worked. It worked. Gracias. And what we did straight away, within 2 weeks of the event, the volcanologists from Universidad de Edimburgo y también con Michigan Tech, por ejemplo, que instalación del sistema de monitoreo para este volcán. Y the institution, el llama INSAVUME, ¿conoces INSAVUME? Sí, sí, exacto. Which is the National Monitoring Agency for Guatemala. We prepared together, trabajamos juntos en diferentes zonas del tiempo, diferentes partes del mundo, en Edimburgo, Estados Unidos y Guate. También creamos esta. Es un análisis preliminar de amenazas por más flujos piroclásticos. Porque la consulta más importante y más urgente en este momento fue ¿dónde es la siguiente? Is it possible another flow can come and a dónde? So no es un pronóstico, no es un prediction, pero es un mapa. Es evidente de nosotros, ¿no? Mira los barrancos más grandes, más profundo en esas partes, y mira los nombres de las comunidades. Estas comunidades en rojo son en más alto riesgo, o zonas de más alto riesgo. Y mira también las rutas, las pequeñas carreteras no tan grandes, y las puentes, las rutas para evacuar las gentes. So, es un map, la challenge es por presentar solo la información más importante. Solo eso es suficiente para crear, para avisar a las agencias donde son las más riesgos, por prioridades, por evacuación y también, sí, etc. Gracias. Eso, en comparación, fue la map que existen. ¿Conoces los mapas de riesgos de USGS? The United States Geological Survey make these maps, and they had actually made this map in 2001, después de la hurricane Mitch. So my point really is the same. It is that sometimes, tal vez, we have the information, but when I look at this map, it's like, oy, mi cabeza. It's a little bit difficult to entender rápido. Si yo presento eso, es un oncólogo en Cruz Rojo, y él dice, oy, Neil, no me puede interpretarlo. So I'm trying to think about ways in which we podemos reducir cuál es we call it the cognitive load of interpreting a map. Gracias. And if you're interested, si tienes interés, después de eso, we were contacted by muchas otras organizaciones de volcanólogos en otras partes del mundo para compartir otros tipos de mapas. ¿Cuántas personas había la primera prototype? Contactarnos y preguntar si es posible. Please, can you put our hazard maps online as well so that people can use them? So we have this project, and I can share this link. It's all done with open data. with ArcGIS. And if you want to visit this, you can look at some of the other sites from Chile, Guatemala, Colombia, también in the Mediterranean. We should have the maps from Mexico too. Gracias. So, esta parte de mi presentación es la cuestión sobre la información técnica y cómo presentarlo, cómo utilizarlo, extract más información. La segunda parte, la otra parte, this idea about community information. Cómo balanzar las conocencias científicas como nosotros with the community, with the information from the community. I want to share with you a moment. Fui un poquito triste. This was an event, we organized this for the survivors of the event, survivors of the eruption. One year later, we realized that they had not had an opportunity to talk about it, to actually share their experiences of surviving this event. Y por esa razón invitamos los miembros de las diferentes comunidades juntos en Antigua de Guatemala por este evento, por compartir sus conocimientos, recolecciones y otros sobre el evento. Fui demasiado triste, pero al mismo tiempo, it was very uplifting because it was an opportunity to rebuild, to talk about the future. Y para mí, que fue interesante was we had these hazard maps. We brought the hazard maps along, and the idea was that the volcanologos were going to explain a little bit about risks. But what happened was the community members, these are community members, these are not scientists, they picked up the maps and they started using them. They started using the maps to explain, eso es no comunidad, estamos aquí en la zona roja, míranos, this is us. And they ¿cómo se dice? Ellos reclaman, they reclaimed the maps. They started to use the maps for different purposes, which we never imagined. And they realized that they shared something with the other communities. Estoy en esta barranca aquí en zona rojo. Tú también, sí, es en otra barranca con zona rojo. And it started to help them to make connections between the communities. For me, it was like a moment, but it was a really interesting moment. Gracias. And so in my final slides, I want to share my thinking with you about how we try to bring more of this community knowledge and how we can como mezclar, como blendar, how do we make and share and combine, como combinar esta información. I'm going to use a different example. It's also in Guatemala. ¿Conoces el lago de Atitlán? Es muy famosa. Es un muy famoso lugar por vacaciones, por ejemplo. It's very beautiful. Geologically, it's really interesting because it's a volcanic system, and it's collapsed. And now there is a big lake al dentro aquí. Es muy, muy, muy bonito. Pero a lo mismo hay riesgos. Muchas de las comunidades que viven al lado del lago son en zonas rojos. They are in risk zones. And in this particular area, hay dos volcanes, el volcán Tolimán y el volcán de Atitlán. Y aquí son pueblitos. Eso es la pueblito de Panabaj. Es en frente de la volcanes. y cuando hay mucho lluvia, hay riesgos aquí de deslaves, son muchos riesgos de deslaves aquí. And in 2005, 2005, there was hay un deslave grande que afecta a todo la pueblito. And basically the pueblito was erased from the map. So the pueblito disappeared from the map. Pero the people who were displaced still want to live in this place. They talk about it, they don't talk about it like a place of sadness. Sí, fue tristemente, sí, pero they look to the future and they say, we still want to live in this place. So when we visited them, I was telling you earlier, when I went there, mi impresión primeramente fue, ¿por qué las personas quieren vivir con esos riesgos? It's very dangerous. ¿Sí? Pero la realidad es, ellos dicen, Neil, no es tan peligroso. Hay otros riesgos en nuestra vida. El riesgo para vivir aquí es solo uno de esos. Hay muchos otros. En la balancea es bueno para nosotros. Preferimos vivir allá. So I'm learning how people think. And the more we listen to local people, the more we understand how they utilize the land. Eso es como un profile, ¿no? Pero un profile un poquito diferente. Is in geology, in geología, we create these cross sections todo el tiempo. Pero en esta sección, mi punta es por colocar en diferentes partes de esta profila las métodos de vida de las personas, por combinar la geología, vegetación, formas de urbanización y acceso al lago por diferentes personas. Y para crear estos tipos de información es una mezcla, ¿no? Es un mashup, es una mezcla of information, geological information, but also social information. These are pictures from people's lives. This is what it's like to be a woman who's trying to wash her clothes here. This is what it's like to grow coffee here. This is what it's like to collect piedras from the quarry here. And this is what it's like to be a lineadore allá in estas partes, to collect wood in this place. So necesitamos conectar los métodos de la vida de las personas en este paisaje. Thank you. So in the project that we worked recently, my role was different. It was a little bit about making maps, but it was about trying to include these elements of real life into the representations, so that when we make maps of risk and when we talk about what people can do, when the government wants to say, you cannot do that, it's prohibido, it's prohibited. Sometimes, as scientists, we accidentally help and we accidentally don't help. So sometimes we make rules which don't help the local people to recover. You know, we often prohibit people from going into zonas rojas because it's peligroso. But the people say to us, hay otros riesgos. And if we want to reclaim and live in this land, es nos decisiones, es nosotros. No es para ustedes, don't tell us what to do. in English. Gracias. So, of course, this process trae tiempo. It takes time. And you might tell me, oh, Neil, no tengo el tiempo por todas esas cosas. But for me, it's really important. And over the course of 3 years, I brought my students to this village, and they learned about what it's like to live in this place. You know, por localizar las voces comunitarias, to understand what local people really think. And my students told me, and I think we should try not to make these lugares tristementes. Let's try not to make these into sad places. Let's try not to make these places only of disaster, because the local people tell me it's also a place of hope. It's also a place where we can recreate things and we can develop it. And so as a scientist, of course, we think there are hazards, but I think it's better to try to balance the two voices. I realized I have a voice as a scientist, but you have a voice as a resident who lives there. So how do you understand? How do you collect that data? That's the first question. You know, conocemos. We know how to do the traditional method. We know how to collect ground control points. We know how to collect GPX tracks. We know technically how to collect the data that we use for the mapping. So what I've been trying to do is to integrate cuando colectamos, when we collect information for ground control, we invite people to walk with us. Because sometimes when you walk, people talk to you. Yeah, when I come over here and talk to you guys, like it's more familiar, it's better. And if I come over and talk to you, we have a connection. So by walking and talking, it creates a kind of amistad, it creates a kind of friendship. And as we walk, people would tell us things which I didn't know, a lot of things about. The ladies told me, it's very difficult for us to wash our clothes here anymore because it's very difficult to access the lake because of Torre la Desarrollo. The access to the lake is really difficult now. The people who are planting the vegetables in these areas told us, yes, the soil is very good, but los dueños de la tierra prohibit us from accessing this area. And there were many examples like this of things we just could not see. The satellites couldn't see it from above because these are cultural things that are really important to the project. They explain why the place is accessible or not accessible, whether or not it's safe, or if it's a risky place. But using my satellites, I can't see that. It's only by asking people that I learn that part. So basically, I'm developing a way of creating ground truth from going to the ground, but not just the conventional ground truth, but instead, what I'm talking about is a kind of social ground truth. So these are GPX files, these are tracks that we collected, and we have ground control points. But along the way, we collect information, social information. The points are different, the points of interest are different. You and I, we would collect ground control points from very visible features. But the people want to tell us about things in different places. They want to tell us about the la vida de un lineador aquí. el acceso a las plantas aquí, los problemas con la finca, el agua potable aquí, access por las piedras aquí. So for me, it's a matter of combining the two kinds of information. And, perdón las mujeres, for me, it's like recognizing that people have a view, and we want to recognize that. They want to show us how dangerous or how safe they feel, and they want to tell us about the consequences of living in zonas rojos or zonas verdes. Gracias. So for me, it's about thinking how we can listen, cómo escuchar, how we can create information, how we can balance. This is the community representación del volcán. Y para mí, que fue interesante sobre esto es la personalidad del volcán. ¿Sí? Este volcán es como un persona, como una personalidad a las personas de las mayas. Se referían a los volcanes o mi padre o mi madre, my grandfather or mi abuela. They use these kind of words to talk about the volcanoes, and they represent them visually like this, abuela, abuelo. And we have to blend that with, this is our knowledge, this is Sentinel-2, no? This is Sentinel-2 imagery. And the question is, how do we locate these kind of features, and how do we blend that with these kind of technical information that we have? Gracias. So I'm beginning to think more about how we create information, scientific information, rutas comunitarias, with information from scientific maps. These are models of extents of lahares, with information about how people live in the landscape, trying to think about how we put this together. Gracias. And one thing we've been exploring recently, it's an idea from cartography, el llama cartographic narrative. It's about that thing that happens when I put a map on the table and I say, viene aquí, mira mi mapa. And we look together at a map. And in the process of looking at the map, we share information. So in este caso, esa fue Aurelia. Aurelia lost her grandparents in the house when the Deslavi came, and she spoke a really triste, compassionate narrative about that process, which she shared with us, and she told us, you can have this story. And we wanted to locate these narratives in the places where she told us. This is where she told us, and these are the features that she talks about in her narrative. And one of my students last year, Samantha, she collected together the information, and I think some of you know the software Story Maps. ¿Conoces Story Maps? Poquito, sí, sí, muchos, sí. Estamos creando por este proyecto de Shell una story map sobre este pueblito. El nombre Vigilando Panabaj. Y puedes buscar por eso en Story Maps, es abierto, y puedes ver. Y si tienes tus móviles, ¿sí? Este QR código, tú puedes ir para checar y visitar esta página y explorar la puebla de Panabaj, no solo en las voces científicos, no solo con los mapas científicos, pero también con un balance o la información de las comunidades. And if you're interested in the process of how we do that, of course, you cannot just make a story map. You have to have content. You have to have the information, and to collect that information takes time. So no es un proceso muy rápido. You can see that we started this work 3 years ago. Visiting, walking, talking, collecting information. And then we collect base information, like information about the deslaves, las información geológico, tectónico, infraestructuro, todas las capas que son normal en SIG, en GIS. Y también, esta parte es un poquito nuevo, we have information produced by the community. We call it community layers, about how people walk, about what happened in the past, about what it's like, cómo es para vivir en una zona roja. Y otros, eventualmente tú digo, Neil, no, pero sí tenemos información sobre sueños, emotions and feelings. People give us a lot of information over time, and not all of that information we should pone on a mapa, but it's an experiment to combine información tradicional con información de la comunidad, ¿no? Y balanzar y representar. And thank you. And si tienes tiempo, puedes explorar este mapa y visualizar las visiones of the community y también la visión de los científicos. This is a hazard map. It's a map of deslaves. And this is their representation of what it's like to live in this place. And I think you can see that there's a lot of hope, esperanza, there's a lot of positivity. People talk about the hazard, they talk about the problems, but if you look at how they represent and what they show, it's very, no es triste. It's mostly positive. It's mostly happy. It's about farming and growing and the birds and the colibris and all of the things that we don't see using Sentinel-2. So that's what we try to do. We try to combine the local and the scientific knowledge. And we try to think about the different ways in which this information is useful. Immediately after the event, we need a lot of technical and structural information. But as we go round the cycle and we start thinking about the future, we need to be optimistic, we need to be realistic, and we need to understand why, even if we have declared a zona roja based on our best scientific information, we might find that people still want to live in this place. And I think the more we do this kind of work, the more we change and the more we learn. And this is just one slide for me reflecting on how I changed from doing this work. You can see this Hoven here, when he first graduated from GIS. You can see, look at the mirror, look how big the monitors are in those days. This is me, como un joven, con the early days of GIS. Aquí, cuando mapear los riscos de los fuegos, este fue en Belice. And then después, cuando en los proyectos, cuando encontramos con familias, con niños, entienda más sobre cuándo y cómo personas quieren vivir en estos lugares. So for me, I started off thinking that the scientific information was the solution. And over time, I realized that we have to include the people in the process. And that's why I'm very happy that we have such a range of things in Edinburgh. So helping me on this project, I have students from lots of different programs. Of course, I have my GIS students and I have my remote sensing students. All the Sentinel-2 work was done by one of the students, and the story map was made by one of my GIS students. But we also have students looking at the sustainability of the environment and thinking about the questions of development in these environments. How do people develop and live in these places? And so because we are a big school, because we have this range of different disciplines, because we have students from the humanities, social sciences, we have technical subjects, we have GIS subjects. That's why it's necessary for us to work together to combine our knowledges. And we also work, in Edinburgh, we have a Centre for Contemporary Latin American Studies, and we have humanities scholars who want also to understand these questions, like why do communities live in these places? What are the risks that they have? And how do people negotiate these risks? And at the moment, we work together in Guatemala with this center because the social science and humanities areas are really good at collecting this information. I didn't have the training to understand cómo conversar con personas, cómo preguntar, how to ask the good question. Yeah. And con tiempo es posible aprender más. We also have doctoral training programs, and even if you want to come and learn from our satellite data projects, you will always have to think about the context. ¿Dónde es? ¿Cuál es el contexto por tu estudias? You know, what are the challenges? What about the people who live in these places? So even my most technical students who say, oh, Dr. Neil, solo me puede trabajar en el laboratorio con mi computador? I say, no, let's go to the field. Vamos a trabajar en campo y encontrar con las chicas que viven. Let's go and see, because that experience is so important, right? And I show them like, okay, I used to be a technical, I used to be like a technical guy, but now I realize it's so important that we interact with the people as well. Gracias. So, gracias por tu atención, gracias por sufrir mi español terrible. Perdón por mi mezcla de English y Spanglish. Si tenemos, Marcos, si tenemos tiempo por preguntas un poquito, podemos.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really like it. And just curious, I would like to know England. Thank you. I would like to know if in England, do you have like a specific law for integrated disaster management? And this law can tell you how to compute risks, for example, taking into account vulnerability and hazards, and that's the way to compute risks, for example. I don't know, I'm just curious.
So if I understand the question in terms of like regulations, for example, so we have different levels of regulation about risk por la razón para mitigar estos riesgos. So en mi país, fortunadamente, no tenemos muchos terremotos, erupciones, pero tenemos inundaciones. So en el caso de inundaciones, tenemos mapas que zonan las regiones. So each region, in quite some detail, you can consult en línea. Hay mapas. Y tú puedes consultar, zoom in this map, and it will tell you cuál es el nivel de riesgo de inundaciones, sobre inundaciones con lluvia o inundaciones desde los ríos, different kinds of risks. And that information is public, it's available. So some people, most people think it's a good idea, because un problema con nosotros es cuando tú vas a comprar tu casita, es importante para checar, ¿es una zona de alto riesgo o no? ¿Es difícil por tener seguridad en esta parte? ¿Es más cariñoso o no? So for us, we think it's a publicly good information to provide it. And so that's an information answer. And about regulaciones, there are rules. For example, we can use that map and we can say, en esta zona no permite utilizar para edificios residenciales, por ejemplo, o no permita o solo por amenidades o un campo de golf sería bueno, pero no edificios or no empresas comerciales. So we have a quite strong regulations, and they are enforced. And that's perhaps the thing, that we enforce those regulations. And we can, for example, the government now, the problem in the past was it's very difficult for me to check, hey, mira, Marco, in tu jardín, ¿qué utilizas? How do you use your land? And now we have very high resolution satellites, and it's possible that we can check using satellites cómo personas va a utilizar their land. And there are cases already where they recognize, hey, ¿qué pasa aquí? What's going on here? This land should not be used for commercial. But look, mira el satélite, imagen, las personas van a visitar, inspectar en la tierra y, por ejemplo, si es una actividad no permiten o una actividad ilegal, enforzar las reglas. So it's a combination of monitoring, enforcement, and planning, the whole thing. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Well, I want to first thank you for this presentation. It's the second time I've listened to it, and it's even better the second time, so thank you. Well, my question goes directly, and it's a bit of a direct question, and it's, how do you begin these conversations with the people? I mean, there is a lot of pushback when you go in and it's like, oh, I'm going to tell you something that you already know. So how do you open that conversation to the people?
Thank you. Are we on? Maybe, is it connected? Yeah, okay. It's Consulta Excelente. And I have to begin by recognizing that it would be imposible para mí solo para visitar, llegar, hey, estoy aquí, dímelo todos tus problemas. No, it's not going to happen, right? For all the reasons. So I think it's really important that we work with local organizations and that we also show a commitment over a longer time. That's what I was thinking when I talked about slow mapping, doing it slowly, because normalmente la presión es muy rápido, GPS, vamos. So we have to rethink that. And for me, the idea was I invest a lot of time traveling to places. And why do I only spend such a tiempo corto when I'm there? So es una inversión en tu tiempo, es una inversión en las comunidades, in the communities. There's no perfect answer, because now I'm thinking about those communities. After 3 years, we have done lots of work, we have built up lots of trust with those communities, and in time they share more with us. They share a little bit, they share a little bit more, they share a little bit more, and then of course you realize that no es solo una comunidad, hay muchas comunidades adentro, diferentes personas tienen different puntos de vista, and that's also challenging. Like, ¿por quién es la mapa? Es la mapa por la comunidad, por toda la comunidad, o en parte de la comunidad. So the best thing I can suggest is, I think I'm still, by giving talks like this to essentially, semi-technical or mostly technical audiences, I'm trying to compartir mi experiencias and to say it's not for everybody. I'm not suggesting that everybody cambia tu disertación, cambia tu proyectos, necesitas incluir a todas las voces de las comunidades en todo. But I am saying, just maybe step back a little bit, think a little bit about how we include that information, and especialmente consider as ¿quién es tu audiencia? Who is the audience for this? Yeah. When you're a student, like in the case of Samantha, she had the technical ability to build the story map, but it would be impossible without her working with the local communities. We created an idea like community researchers, people from local universities or people from the local villages, and we build a relationship with them. And they learn from us and we learn from them. I think it really helps us, because we think as a scientist we have a particular method and we have a particular solution. We are focused on data, for example, many times. And for me, it's a matter of thinking about this idea of the different kinds of data that are important, and just to give myself a chance to sit down and say, okay, now I'm sitting down with you, having some soup. Let's talk about, I can tell you what I can do, and sometimes the people will tell me, is that it? Is that all you can do? You can make a map from a satellite that's in the sky. And what can that see? What does that know? It's a very good question, right? I don't know if that's the answer. But...
No, that was great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
¿Podemos compartir? Sí. Gracias, Nancy.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. My question is regarding the studies at the University of Edinburgh. We as students, some of us are from the master and also from the bachelor. What do we need to study at University of Edinburgh? Like, probably for many of us, it's possible to still do it during the master, but also as a PhD student. I know we need very good financial support, maybe, but regarding this, I don't know if any scholarship or any local program or something.
So, well, let me talk a little bit about the challenge of funding, because for many of us, that's a big challenge. So there are different ways in which you can get involved. And in many cases, I often think that the level of the masters is very good, because it gives you a chance to explore, it gives you a chance to try new things, but also you have a kind of support. You have, for example, Samantha wanted to do story maps, And she told me, but I don't want to do conventional story mapping, and I don't want to just use scientific information. So the masters can be a very good way in which we can try something new in tempo corta in a shorter time. My PhD students, the benefit of having the longer time is that they can look at things from the different perspectives. And one thing about being a PhD student is that you can tú puedes cambiar tu dirección un poquito. You can bring your existing knowledge, but there's also more time to learn new things. In el caso de Samantha, she was basically bringing her technical knowledge and applying it in this context. But she did not have time in a master's to think about how we collect information from communities, because that's a different way of learning, a different way of collecting data. So in those time frames, you have different opportunities for how you can learn and what you can do. And en part se dependen sobre los recursos. Hay diferentes fondos para las diferentes maneras. For masters, there's a few funds which Mexican students, some of my students have applied for. Originalmente, los estudiantes de Jalisco, the state of Jalisco, applied for Brockman Foundation scholarships. I think, creo que es verdad, that nowadays it's abierto. Students from other parts of Mexico can also apply for Brockman scholarships. So check that. Otro fundo is the Chevening scholarships and the British Council. They also have awards for Mexican students. And then the more familiar ones. So CONACYT, for example, are still offering less scholarships, and I completely support that. I recognize that Edinburgh is cariñoso para visitar, para estudiar, and I completely support your government's idea. Let's invest more in Mexican universities. I think it's very good. But I think that there's still an opportunity for at least some of the students to have that international experience, to study with us in Scotland, and to bring your knowledge of the local situation. In all my slides, really, I'm saying that local knowledge is crucial. So we have a lot of techniques, for example. We can teach you very technical things. We can teach you about object-based classification or noise reduction in Sentinel-1 radar images. We can teach you a lot of that. But you also have to bring your own, to think first of all about what the problem is and how we may translate that technical solution into something that's useful. So my guidance is that it's good to do innovation. I think there's innovation in this. It's good to try new techniques and to know about new sensors and new methods. But it's also good if the product is useful, and not just useful for me to get my PhD, but useful for, say, communities. And if you can think about something that's really useful for somebody, you'll have a better engagement with them. So it's not necessary for everybody. I have some students who say, no, Neil, let me stay in the laboratory. I just want to write this code in R. But the best experiences, I think, are when they apply that. It's not easy. In some ways, it's easier just to stay in the lab. It's more difficult to really apply that knowledge in the real world. So if you can try to do that, I think in the end, there's more chance that you will be satisfied, and there's more chance that you will really find a job in the future that you feel happy to do that job. But I'm happy to talk to people about other funding. So Conacyt have some scholarships. Several of my students have loans from FIDER, for example. They can obtain a loan for part of the cost of their studies. And there's other organizations as well. FUNED, for example, also offer funding. And some universities only, and Edinburgh is on the list. So the sort of the top institutions. And it's important for me to say that there's other good universities in the UK. But if you're interested in this kind of area of geoscience and how we apply geoscience, then we are on the FUNED lists for this. So it means that if you make an application there, you're eligible for that loan. I hope that's helpful, Nancy. Yeah. And we also welcome students, for shorter time. It's possible that if, like, through your supervisor, if I can find a supervisor in Edinburgh who wants to make a connection, we can have like a short exchange. Yeah.
¿No? Bueno, le damos las gracias al doctor Neil por su presentación y por dedicarnos un tiempo bastante amplio y resolver todas las dudas. De todos modos, el doctor Neil puede recibir correos si tienen alguna otra duda o si tienen algún comentario. Y bueno, pues también igual los alumnos pues pueden también contactar conmigo, ¿no? Para cualquier duda, ¿no? Les agradecemos por esperar, por el tiempo que nos demoramos un poquito en la presentación, pero pues creo que valió mucho la pena, ¿no? Entonces le damos las gracias al doctor Neil por su presentación. Gracias.